Well, a very good evening to everyone who is dialed in, and welcome to this IIBA UK chapter webinar. My name is Adrian Reed, and I'm one of the volunteers that helps run events at IIBA UK chapter. And I'm really pleased to say that we are joined today by Richard Larson of Watermark Learning. Now, I've known Rich for
Hello.
a few years, and we met virtually initially, and I was fortunate enough to see Rich present at the Building Business Capabilities conference a number of years ago. And particularly last year, I was really enthralled by Rich's presentation on the Entrepreneurial BA. So we asked him whether he would do a virtual version of the presentation for us, and I'm really pleased to say that he agreed. A little bit about Rich. So Rich is president and founder of Watermark Learning, and a successful entrepreneur with over 30 years of experience in business analysis. With a presentation entitled The Entrepreneurial BA, Rich, over to you.
Okay, Adrian, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay? Is the
Yeah,
sound coming through?
I can indeed.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules, especially it's the evening over there. It's middle of the day here in the U.S. where I'm based, and I'm really glad that you could attend, and I appreciate your inviting me to speak, Adrian, and everyone else. You know, despite having started a company, believe it or not, I'm not a true entrepreneur. I'm a reluctant one. And believe it or not, you all might be one of those too. I'm here to challenge you a little bit today with a discussion about career growth and the notion that all of you can and should be entrepreneurial BAs. And I really mean that. By the end of the presentation, my goal is for you to see why it's essential for us as BAs to become more entrepreneurial, what it can do for our organizations, and hopefully you'll learn some practical ways to help you get there. And I've certainly been entrepreneurial in my career, in having started up a company many years ago. And it might sound strange that I call myself a reluctant one, but it's really true. Because before I started my company, I was a happy and productive employee, and later I was an intrapreneur in 3 of my jobs, and I'll explain the differences in a moment. And when I graduated from college, entrepreneurship was basically the last thing from my mind. I was busy raising a family, doing a career, and I got a normal job working at a bank, and it taught me a lot. And it was after a couple of jobs later, almost at the age of 40, that I started a company. It was not because I had a burning desire to be an entrepreneur as much as it was frustration with things at my job at the time, and I'll explain more about that to you a little bit later. But you know, my story only serves as a backdrop for what I want to talk to you today about, and that's the notion that BAs can and should be more entrepreneurial, because there are a lot of overlapping skills, traits, techniques between what entrepreneurs do and what BAs do. And we'll take a look at some of those traits and look at how all of this subject applies to business analysis. Plus, along the way, we'll take a look at some keys to being a successful entrepreneur or intrapreneur in your organization, because let's face it, there are a lot of challenges that are happening in our industry, whether it's outsourcing of jobs, whether it is frameworks like Scrum that don't have a prescribed role for a BA, or all the other challenges and changes happening in industry. I think we do need this challenge to keep growing our professions and our careers. Now, for those of you that don't know who Watermark is, there's a slide in your deck to talk about it. I don't need to sit through it, but hopefully some of you have experienced our CBAP certification products, and hopefully we've helped some of you get your CBAP. Now, to get started, I have this little quiz for you. It's not really a quiz, but it's kind of like a survey. And I call it a preneur survey because I use the term preneur to mean both entrepreneur and intrapreneur sometimes. I first ran across that term in the movie The Social Network a few years ago. You know, the one about the founding of Facebook? It's a good entrepreneurial success story and a good movie to watch while we're on the subject. Anyway, I'm going to read you 5 statements, and I want you to answer to yourself in your head or on paper even whether you usually, sometimes, or rarely exhibit these traits or tendencies. Ready? Okay, first one. Are you a skilled problem solver who usually, sometimes, or rarely takes on important tasks within your company? Which of those 3 things apply applies to you. Number two, do you tend to see trends in your organization before most others? Number three, do you usually, sometimes, or rarely spot business problems before projects have been launched to solve them? Number four, can you help your business improve its processes and also recommend features that they don't even realize they might need? And number five, do you usually, sometimes, or rarely prefer to go personally along with the company versus just putting in time? And by the way, I got these 5 questions out of an interesting article about entrepreneurship that's referenced here on the slide, and I adapted it to the presentation today. And I think if you say sometimes or usually to all of these, I do think that's one indication you have the right entrepreneurial stuff. Now, first of all, what is an entrepreneur? In the book, The Lean Startup, Eric Ries says, entrepreneurs are everywhere. You know, you got famous entrepreneurs like Sir Richard Branson or Oprah or Elon Musk of the Tesla Motor Corporation. But I'm not really want to talk to you about those famous types. There's just a proliferation of information about entrepreneurship these days. Have you noticed that? All of the media seems to cover, whether it's online or magazines or TV shows. I don't know about in the UK, but in the US there are more and more television shows devoted to entrepreneurism, like the Shark Tank or Dragon's Den, and too many to name. And many, many more books on the subject, many of which I read getting ready for the presentation. But what is an entrepreneur? You might have your own words in mind. What do you think of when you hear the term entrepreneur? Well, officially it means somebody who undertakes something and assumes risks. Okay, it's a good start. A more formal definition is described here, and it talks about individuals working in a small business. Well, Richard Branson runs some pretty big businesses, and he's an entrepreneur, so some of these definitions you have to kind of modify in your mind, but definitely assuming risks and rewards of a venture, an idea, or service, and often seen as a leader or an innovator of new ideas and business processes. Now, some of these things might apply to you in your role or where you want to grow in your career to become. Not necessarily an entrepreneur, but you know, a leader and an innovator sounds pretty good to me. All right, now another quick little quiz just for fun. Which of these is the most likely entrepreneur? Is it A, the wild-eyed inventor who's just invented something in his head, like the flux capacitor, if you're a fan of that movie, Back to the Future? B, are they young, hoodie-wearing programmers out to develop the next killer app? Or is it C, the average-looking, middle-aged kind of guy that looks like a lot of BAs and PMs that I've worked with? Well, if you'd answered C, you'd be right. Meet Hamdi Ulukaya, the Turkish-American founder of Chobani Yogurt, and he was named Ernst & Young's 2013 Entrepreneur of the Year. And I like the example of him because he definitely doesn't look like Steve Jobs or Mark Zuckerberg, you know, some of the tech entrepreneurs. He's also more middle-aged, which reminds me that most new businesses are being started today by middle-aged people. You may not have known that. We all assume entrepreneurs, we think of young people. I ran across some research from the Kauffman Foundation. It's an entrepreneurial think tank based in the US, and they had some very interesting data, the most recent of which I saw was a couple years old, that said 34% of all businesses were started by people 50 years old and older. 1/3 of all new businesses, and I think they surveyed mainly the US, but I think that applies worldwide, that only 15% of all new businesses were done by people under 30. And to me, that kind of dispelled the notion that entrepreneurs are young. I remember my late father-in-law, when I started the company, said, "Rich, aren't you a little bit old to start a company?" Seriously, he said that to me because he thought entrepreneurs should be young. So that kind of thinking led me to think about, well, there are really different life stages of entrepreneurs. I didn't fit the young, lifelong entrepreneur that my father-in-law was thinking about. I'm more the middle category here on this slide, the reluctant entrepreneur that I mentioned to you. And then there's a new category that I call elderpreneurs. First, the lifelong entrepreneurs, like these tech giants who you recognize, start young, are in it for the challenge, are very risk tolerant, and they tend to stay entrepreneurs their entire life. And they may even start up new companies, like Steve Jobs started many companies. Sometimes they're called serial entrepreneurs. But Silicon Valley did not invent the term. It's been around since the 1700s. Coco Chanel in the early 1900s in France started her perfume and fashion empire at the age of 27, and she stayed a lifelong entrepreneur and kept starting other companies. Levi Strauss in the 1850s sold his first pair of Levi jeans at the age of 24, and he stayed a lifelong entrepreneur. You know, the other thing these have in common is that all these people did not finish college, or should I say none of these people finished college. A common trait amongst lifelong entrepreneurs. Whereas reluctant entrepreneurs, we tend to finish college. We tend to be more calculated risk takers. We tend to base our businesses on the experience that we've had, like a business analyst, let's say. Or like this guy that I ran across in my reading, Brian Quitner. He worked for about 15 years for the Santa Barbara Harbor Patrol, and he kept dropping his flashlights into the ocean or breaking them on land because he needed two hands to do his job. And that frustrated him to no degree, and he finally got so frustrated he invented a new hands-free lighting device that fit into an officer's pocket to let them see at night and use their two hands at the same time. But he didn't quit his day job when he just had that invention. In fact, he kept refining the idea, and he and his wife sold the product out of their living room all over the world till the point where they sold enough to be able to quit their day jobs and then go into the business full time. That last part is a very common trait amongst reluctant entrepreneurs, by the way, where you don't just instantly quit your day job to start something new. That happened to my wife Elizabeth and me. Here we are back in the early 90s when we were actually young. And Elizabeth worked her day job for 4 years teaching part-time in the company before she quit and joined the company full-time. And very common reluctant entrepreneur trait. Now, the elderpreneur, as I call them, sometimes called encore entrepreneurs, is yet another category, later in life, usually late middle age or older. These are people who maybe have had a lifelong kind of ambition or goal or dream of starting or running or buying a company. Take Judy and Steve Soldinger, for example. She's a former nurse. He's a former TV broadcaster. In their 60s, instead of retiring, they took their savings and invested in a company called Crispy Cakes. That's a small niche company in the northeast of the U.S. that makes yummy treats. They might ship them to the UK, but if you go down to Disney World in Florida, you can definitely buy them because these two have now gotten the company to a point where they are selling their goods at Disney World. But at first, their family and friends thought they were nuts. In their 60s, they should be retiring and going to Florida and playing golf, not doing a company and working 12 hours a day out in a factory, which they actually loved. So that's kind of a good example of an elderpreneur. A smaller example is one I ran across called Linda Nagamine. She's also in her 60s when she started her company. It was based on a little invention she made up called the clay apporter, which is French for keys to go. And you can see it there on her dog, perhaps. I know it's a small little image, but she was frustrated by losing her keys all the time, and so she made a device that fit her on a dog to hold on to the keys so she would never lose them again. And that she started finding other people who wanted that, and she sold other products that solved similar problems for her customers. So you might think to yourself, I am not going to invent something. I'm not going to buy a company when I'm 60, but I still am interested in being more entrepreneurial. Well, you know what? You can act and behave and work more entrepreneurial by being an intrapreneur. Have you heard this term before? Intrapreneur. But if you have any comments, send them on in to Adrian as questions or just comments, and he'll break in as needed. And certainly at the end of the session, we'll have time for questions and answers. So as any questions occur to you, please send them into Adrian or any comments as well. Because I'm curious, how many of you consider yourself an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur? If you are, please send in something through the GoToWebinar question panel. Entrepreneurs also undertake something like entrepreneurs, but without the same kind of risk, because you're generally working inside your firm, acting entrepreneurial, using those same kind of skills on a special idea or project, and yet developing it like an entrepreneur would. It's a cool hybrid. The term has only been around since the 1970s, but the concept is growing and growing, and I see as much or more interest in Europe as I do in the US for this concept. My first stint as an intrapreneur happened at that bank I mentioned to you, where I was promoted to a job where I didn't have to do regular work anymore, which is good. I could do reviewing of different departments. We had major extensive efforts, mind you. I wasn't kind of kicking back, but I was going from department to department with the team, and we'd review the operations of the different department we were assigned to, come up with findings and recommendations, which are usually really extensive because we looked at everything from processes to staffing to EDP requirements. That's what we called them at the time. I'm dating myself. If any of you know what EDP means, you're also dating yourself. Anything was fair game. And boy, did we make recommendations that might have disrupted the bank's operations because we were very well researched and we had a lot of support from senior management. But they faced some risk if they adopted it. Likewise, we had some personal risk if we made a bad recommendation. So there is still some risk as an entrepreneur, but it's a very satisfying role. I'd have kept doing it at the bank, except I got promoted to a teller supervisor, and that didn't last long. I had to get out of there and go into IT. So you might be wondering why this emphasis on entrepreneur, why they're important. Well, first of all, some of you are probably functioning as entrepreneurs today. And hopefully you send in a comment to Adrian if you are of those. And if not, look a little more closely into my mirror, my virtual mirror. This could be you. You might be functioning it today. And part of the reason for that is companies need us to act more intrapreneurial, if you will. And the reason is because they need it to innovate. They need it to fuel business growth. They need it to stay competitive. And entrepreneurs are just the way to do that. Part of the way entrepreneurs do that is by helping accelerate positive change. Now we can get change done, of course, you all know, from process improvement. That helps. We've all probably done that in our careers. We work on projects and programs that gets bigger change. But I think the biggest, more impactful change, the breakthrough kind of innovations, happen the best using entrepreneurs, people who are not assigned a regular project role or departmental role, but are in a separate team that, like I was back at the bank, where I could rove around and we could come up with new things that the people doing the job didn't have time to do. All right, so that's part of the philosophy of all this. And while it might sound cool, you might be wondering, can I even do it? Is there any kind of avenue or receptivity at my organization for this? Well, I think there is. I ran across an article from a writer named Dan Schawbel, who writes on entrepreneur and intrapreneur subjects. And he did a survey in conjunction with American Express. I think it was across the world. Anyway, he surveyed senior executives, and what he found was kind of staggering. He found that 58% of managers are either very or extremely willing to support a new business opportunity within their company. In other words, willing to support entrepreneurs. You know, he didn't use that word per se, because I don't know that would have resonated necessarily, because it's still a growing concept. So I think at your organization there may not be an entrepreneur department, and senior executives might not tap you on the shoulder and say, James or Joan, would you like to be an entrepreneur? But the ground is fertile for you to step into that and for you to make a move, and that's part of the career growth aspect to today's discussion. An example of an entrepreneur I ran across is someone from Target Corporation here in the U.S. named Sarah Peterson. You may have heard of Target in conjunction with their data security breach a couple years back, but even before that they were being challenged with social media marketing. In fact, they were lagging behind their competition in it, and Sarah and a small team were assigned to come up with a solution. So they went off to a local pub near headquarters, and the name of the pub, you guys will like this, is called Brits Pub. And yes, they have darts and they have lawn bowling on the roof. It's kind of a cool pub. Anyway, they came back with an idea called Cartwheel, which is a Facebook page to let Target shoppers get discounts and coupons on things they regularly like to buy. Funny how going to a pub comes up with good ideas, huh? Something about that, yes? But anyway, the executives at Target really liked it. In fact, more liked it and more liked it, till finally it grew to about a team of 200 people, many of which were part-time on the team, with a lot of sponsors to please and get approvals from, and it just bogged down, as you can imagine. So what Sarah did is convince management to bring back a Target consultant named Alan Wiseman, a startup kind of guy, to help them get off the ground. What they did is three key things. I'll quickly go through them. Number one, they made Sarah the product owner to make decisions on behalf of Cartwheel. Number two, they downsized the team to 50 full-time people. Very important because they had an unwieldy thing otherwise. Number three, they convinced Target, and this may be the most significant thing, to release Cartwheel as an app in beta form. Ooh, we can't do that at Target. Ooh, horrors, horrors. It was kind of the reaction because this is not something Target did. There might be bugs in it, and there were. But they quickly fixed them with a dedicated team and learned what shoppers liked and improved it so much that it helped increase Target's social media engagement to some 251% according to the industry data. And 80% of that was attributable to Cartwheel. So it's a rousing, successful, intrapreneurial story. And today, Sarah is still the product owner of this last time I checked. Now, her story illustrates three main challenges that a book called The Lean Enterprise, which is an interesting read, talks about for entrepreneurs. Number one, the best opportunities are the ones like this Cartwheel, where it's kind of small and well-defined, but yet can have potential impact. Number two, the motivation for entrepreneurs is different from regular employees because if you're paid a flat salary, it takes away some of the risk-reward component of entrepreneurs. And the third challenge is entrepreneurs need to be left alone from company politics. Otherwise, they get bogged down like Sarah was in her effort. And I totally relate to those three challenges because my second entrepreneurial stint happened when I was a consultant working at a consulting company after I'd left the bank and I'd gotten farther into IT and I was getting a little burned out on consulting. And my bosses offered me a chance to start the training department at the consulting company. They knew I'd done training as one of my jobs at the bank way back when. So I got the chance to get things started. I really acted like an entrepreneur, started like as if it was my own business. They left me a lot of latitude and I rewarded them hopefully with a lot of good hard work. Anyway, each of these challenges was there for me for sure. It was a small enough, self-contained, and I don't know if it was impactful though, looking back, because they viewed training as a loss leader to get the more consulting business. The motivation, I was a flat salary employee as well, so there wasn't always there. I didn't get any rewards. I put in a ton of work as an entrepreneur would, but I wasn't getting rewarded at all for the efforts. And third, the internal politics were always a challenge for me because I found I couldn't get the salespeople to sell training. I couldn't get the consulting managers to provide me employees to do the training. I had to do a lot of both those things myself. So that was a challenge I never really was able to overcome, but I learned a lot about the fact I didn't like that. I needed to get away from it. So switching gears a little bit, thinking about traits of entrepreneurs and BAs for a second. Because that's, I think, an important underlying part of this whole talk, and that is that we can contribute significantly in an entrepreneurial way using our BA background, skills, talents, and initiative. This diagram on the chart is something we've used to show how three main facets can contribute to productivity in organizations. Number one, through projects. Number two, through process and process management. And number three, through products and product management. Just to ask you a question, which of these three corners would BA skills and traits and techniques fit the mostly into? Which of these three would be the most applicable? If you said this one, product management, I'd agree with you because, you know, after all, it's about requirements, yes, but even farther, we're solving the business problem, doing root cause analysis maybe, coming up with business cases. The requirements for sure from high level to low level, but also making sure the requirements are tested and doing solution evaluation after the solution is launched. All of these things are very important not only for our BA work, but they're important for product management and therefore, I say, for innovation and startups. Project management and process management are very critical to growing a company, I can share with personal experience, but product management is really at the forefront of getting a product or a company launched. And that's where BA skills and techniques can come into play. Now, one of the books I read on entrepreneurism is this thing called The Reluctant Entrepreneur by Michael Masterson. It's a good book, very practical, a lot of common sense. You can tell the guy has worked a lot in business. He's not writing some get-rich-quick schemes kind of thing. And he listed a whole bunch of entrepreneurial traits. And as I read them, I said to myself, you know, a BA exhibits those. And the more and more I read, the longer my list became. And I published a blog on our website with 15 or 16 some techniques. And I boiled them down to 6 here on the slide to talk to you about, like innovation. We do that, don't we, when we analyze and propose and design new solutions that meet business needs and maybe sometimes even exceed expectations. As entrepreneurs have to solve problems, so do we as BAs, don't we, through problem definition, root cause analysis, brainstorming of solutions. I can tell you every day there is some problem as an entrepreneur, and your problem solving skills as a BA really can come in handy. Observation and experience are important to entrepreneurs, but you know, as BAs, do you use observation as one of your techniques for understanding business needs and requirements, as well as benchmarking, looking at the competitive solutions? Product testing for entrepreneurs is important, and so is equivalent trait for us as BAs. Influencing skills for influencing stakeholders, and if we want to be treated as a trusted advisor is very important. And last but not least, communication skills. Masterson says this is the most important trait for an entrepreneur. That might surprise you. You might think of influencing or innovation or whatever. He says communication, especially active listening, is the most important thing. And so as BAs, do we not also value communication skills as being really, really important, including listening? So you see that there's a lot of overlap between the two. And thinking about our BA skills and techniques, I want to share with you an example of a company I heard about a couple of years ago, a radio story about this company called ProScribe, which has scribes assigned to assist physicians with recording notes and observations, interfacing with different departments, and providing support role to the physician so the physician can concentrate on the patient care and not on record keeping. Because in this day and age of electronic medical records, I don't know about you, but the last time I saw my doctor, he was too busy interacting with his computer to record his notes than he was looking at me. And so these professional scribes provide a very valuable service that medical clinics, especially emergency rooms, are willing to pay for. And I thought to myself, a BA could have started that company, right? Think about it. If you scribe a requirements workshop, why wouldn't those same scribing skills ported to a medical situation work just as well and solve a major problem they have? So that's really what innovation is advancing some new process, adding more value that people are willing to pay for. So think about this. Number one, your call to action, CTA, call to action. Number one, how can I apply my BA skills in an entrepreneurial way to help my company grow? Because ProScribe doesn't have to be an outsider or a brand new company. If you work in a medical provider, you could provide those professional scribes internally in your own organization as an answer to a problem at a medical provider. So what else can I do to use my BA skills entrepreneurially? Now let's shift gears away from these traits and things and talk about keys to success, because I've done a lot of thinking about this over the years, that there are many secrets to success, many keys to that. If you go to, Richard Branson, who I like and admire a lot, has lots of sayings out on the internet you can find. But there are 3 keys that I think that are very important for any entrepreneur or intrapreneur, and that's inspiration, passion, and commitment. Those 3 things, above all else, I find the most important. And the order is important too, because you can be very passionate about something. For example, I know some of you probably don't have a center of excellence for business analysis at your organization. You'd really like to have that. You know in your heart that it would solve problems, and you know beyond doubt that it would be a good thing for your organization. But if you haven't had the inspiration of what problem you're solving or how to find the people that would benefit and be willing to pay for this, your idea is not going to go anywhere. And likewise, you might have a great idea, feel passionate about it, but if you don't have the time or the energy or the commitment to make it come to fruition and succeed, it's not going to work either. All three are important. Let's start with inspiration. I love this quote. It's about sometimes the result of taking a misstep in the right direction. And it's also sometimes thinking outside the box. Kind of a funny story I ran across. This visitor went to a bank in Geneva, Switzerland, and he asked the banker to give him a $100 loan for a year. And the banker said, well, what do you have for collateral, sir? And he said, he pointed out to the parking lot, I've got a Mercedes sedan sitting out there. And the banker said, okay, we're good. So a year goes by, the visitor comes back to the bank, pays off his loan and then $10 of interest, and as he's about to go and get his car, the banker says, sir, I'm just curious about something. You know, you obviously don't need the loan based on the kind of car you have. Why did you want to have it? And the visitor turns to the banker and says, well, it's easy, just think outside the box. Where else in Geneva could I get a parking spot for $10 for an entire year? Okay, well, I should have said euros or pounds or something right to me, but you get the point. Think outside the box. But you know, thinking outside the box doesn't mean you have to invent something. A misconception is entrepreneurs invent things, and rarely do they do that. It's just about coming up with a better product. As Liz Lang, the founder of Liz Lang Clothes, said, just because there are other products out there doesn't mean you can't play. She took this to mean in her life, creating a maternity line of clothes for women who were tired like she was of the dowdy look of maternity wear for women. She was a fashion writer at Vogue years ago and a working mom, and when she got pregnant she got really frustrated. So she, on her own, researched fashion design, taught herself everything she could, including other kinds of designs like Vera Wang wedding dresses of all things. And she came up with some innovative designs. She didn't invent maternity clothing. She just made them better. And the idea really spread from her one-room office that she rented to start to when she quit her day job and took the company full-time and finally sold it many years later for a lot of money to Target stores. So our tip, an idea, or a takeaway for us as business analysts is really pay attention to benchmarking techniques and developing those skills. As an entrepreneur, we use those very frequently. It helped us get started as a company and it helps us stay competitive. That's something as a BA that you can really add a lot of value to your work in an entrepreneurial way. Inspiration and ultimately innovation happen because of good ideas, and every successful business is built on one, as Michael Masterson says. The idea for our business is kind of simple because in the early 90s, most training was done of the kind we do by large players like IBM or Arthur Andersen. Do you like my slide of a large? Actually, this is a giant. It's about 20 feet tall. I took this when we were in Thailand many years ago. Anyway, these giant training providers really were using training to help them sell hardware in IBM's case, or consulting for Andersen. And the idea of having a company who do nothing but training, here's little old me at my trusty rusty IBM PC competing with just selling training. It may not sound innovative today, but that small bit of innovation was new back in the 90s. There weren't many people like me out there. So it's kind of a simplistic example, but it worked in my case. So these examples have some things in common. One of the things I really think for especially us as reluctant entrepreneurs, as business analysts trying to look at how we can be more entrepreneurial, is that these ideas and inspirations came from experience. It's the experience we have at our organizations, experience we have as business analysts. They also come from just being prepared, being good at learning new things, paying attention to the techniques. There are many new techniques in the version 3 of the BABAC, 16 new techniques, now 50 of them. Many of them are entrepreneurial things like the business model canvas and so forth. So the other thing these examples have in common, I think, is a degree of frustration. Whether it's frustration dropping flashlights like Brian Quitner, frustration losing your keys like Linda Nagamine, frustration with training being perceived as a lost leader, whatever the motivation is, look for what frustrates you, because these things are like sparks. The more that you add up the sparks, they can come up with innovation. And Keith Sawyer, in a book called Group Genius, talks about creativity really stems from a series of these sparks, and so focus on your collaboration skills. That's very important for entrepreneurs. We think of entrepreneurs maybe being a single person starting up in a basement. Well, I did after all. But it's really a series of sparks that's key to success. So think about what inspires you. Look around for what frustrates you, your colleagues, your customers, and using those issues, that could be the source of your inspiration and the beginning of some entrepreneurial venture, either within your company or outside of it. Second key to success is passion. The loving of what you do, the ability to stay up late and research things like Liz Lang did on her own time, and or the commitment to keep going when times might get tough, are all aspects of passion. And it's hard to imagine a successful entrepreneur without passion for what they do. Meet two passionate entrepreneurs from Clorox company here in the US. They're working moms and frustrated by their company's products that were not the greatest for their kids or pets around the house. It might be okay for industrial use, but they started researching how can Clorox produce a cleaning agent that's environmentally friendly and yet still effective at cleaning. Nice challenge, but they spent time on their own on evenings and weekends researching this, and they stumbled upon a scientist, which was very fortuitous for them, because the scientists at Clorox also had the same idea and passion, and the three of them teamed up to start formulating actual formulations to test out on research groups, which they did. And they weren't always successful, but they kept at it. Their passion kept them going, even because they still had to do this part-time. They finally convinced their bosses to let them work on this full-time when the idea seemed viable enough. And eventually, after about 2 or 3 years, they succeeded in producing a product line called Clorox Anywhere. I'm not sure if they sell that in the UK, but the idea behind this has spread, and there are many products like that now around the world. And there are several other products at Clorox similar to this. And so my illustration is that, number one, these two were passionate about what they felt. And so they focus on those companies, products, and customers using that passion. Number two, they also are more like BAs than anything. These two are product managers, not the scientist like a developer, but instead more like a BA. In fact, I think another way of talking about entrepreneurship is that product managers can often be thought of as entrepreneurs. And so that's another, to me, a viable career path for a BA who wants to go in that direction without necessarily striking out on their own. So passion comes in different flavors and fashions and ways to look at it. Like I said, it's about loving what we do. It helps to fuel our commitment, and I'm going to talk to you more about commitment in just a little bit. Number three, it sustains us when times are tough. Because the idea of giving up is often there for an entrepreneur, especially at the beginning. And lastly, customers will sense it and want to do business with it if we have genuine passion. I was talking to a colleague only yesterday who runs another training company, and she said, you know, we got the business because even though we were higher priced, we were passionately professional about it, and that shone through to the client. And I have to think about in our career at Watermark over the years, that has been something we've just had over what we do. And it's not something you can fake, but if customers sense it, it will help you in your ventures. So think about what you're passionate about, and I can honestly say I've not been bored more than a handful of times in 25 years in business. And so to wrap up this topic of entrepreneurial passion, about letting it show through, because either you're going to be an agent of change or a victim of change. And so your second call to action is, think about what if you own the business that you work for today. Put that on for a second. Try that on. And if you see a bad solution being implemented to a problem, speak up. If it was your business, you would, right, and try to find alternatives. Do you ever see nagging problems that go unsolved? As an entrepreneur, you'd want to get it solved, either proposing something or just fixing it, and any bright ideas for company products or services. So these are just some thoughts. How can I act more entrepreneurial? And the third aspect of our keys to success, commitment, is a little bit about perspiration, as Thomas Edison said. It's also about stick-to-itiveness, and it's also about priorities. And kind of a funny story on that line is a young man won a ticket to the Super Bowl over here in the U.S. And he got to the stadium only to find out he was in the very last row and he could barely see the field. Imagine going to a big football match over in the UK and the same thing, right? Anyway, he looks down toward the field, sees a spot open 20 rows up, and thinks, hey, I'd rather have that. So he goes down at a break and he asks this guy, who was an older gentleman, sir, is that seat open next to you? And the man looks up and he said, yeah, it is. And the young man said, well, whoa, that's surprising. Why would that be open? It's a big game. And the older man said, well, my wife and I have been to every Super Bowl since we were first married, but she just passed away and it's open. And the young man said, oh, I'm so sorry. That's terrible. Couldn't you find a friend or a relative to take her seat? And the old man looks up at him and says, no, they're all at the funeral. Well, that's commitment, right? Or priorities, something like that. Commitment is also this website, which you might have seen before, called Craigslist. It's something started by Craig Newmark back in the 90s. And doesn't this guy just look like a BA? I'm telling you. Anyway, Craig started this as a small thing in San Francisco that grew statewide, nationwide, and finally it's around the world in 70 different countries, and they post 80 million posts a month, and all that with less than 20 employees. That's pretty astounding. Now, how do they do that? Well, Craig says, even though the community has grown exponentially, our philosophy and structure hasn't changed at all. That's what I call commitment. They even turned down a lucrative deal from Microsoft that would have fancied up the website, and it wouldn't look so pretty as it looks today. In fact, one of Craig's friends called it the visual appeal of a pipe wrench. And the idea here is that, you know, a company is about connecting people in their everyday lives. It's not about how good the website looks, and it would fundamentally change how we did business if we made it really too fancy. So it's not that making money is bad. What I'm trying to say here is that knowing your mission and your vision and sticking to it is a key to success. That's what I mean by commitment. Commitment comes from being good at what you do. Like Craig got a lot of good feedback because he connected people with entertainment events and other things going on in the San Francisco area. And that gave him confidence to spread that out to a larger audience, because competence helps breed confidence. I know I'm not personally self-confident that much, but I am when it comes to work. It really helps fuel my commitment. And it also helps give people courage to either turn down lucrative deals like Craig did. They had to take a lot of courage to do that, or courage to ask others for money. That's one of the hardest things an entrepreneur has to do, or an intrapreneur asking for funding takes a lot of courage, like those two from Clorox who had to go to their boss to try to get permission to work on this product during the day. And lastly, cognizance about who you are, knowing who you are like Craig's list, sticking to it. And by the way, I had to work very hard for that last C word. And our company discovered painfully we're not a company that can grow by acquisition. We bought a small training company a few years ago, and it didn't really go that well. We kind of broke even on it, didn't lose our shirt, but still we learned it'd be better to grow slowly and organically. So it's all about knowing who you are, and that commitment can overcome some of the troubles that any business will face. Because passion alone isn't enough, as Liz Lang said. You have to do a lot of hard work and afterwards. And that happened on our third entrepreneurial story. That was working at Watermark Learning several years ago. We started our first and only piece of software called our online study exam. Some of you might have used it to help you with your CBAP. Anyway, it took some commitment to launch it because it was a distraction from our training business, and growing software is not exactly what we're known for. But we use a lot of BA techniques to help with, and that's the other thing I want to really emphasize with you all, that BA techniques help every entrepreneur, from the survey and the research to the business case to the requirements to the verifying the testing and evaluating the solution, etc. I could go on and on about how many BA techniques straight out of the Babak we used to build and maintain this system. So my third call to action for you as we wrap up is to think about your inner preneur. and what you might want to do to pursue it. And the final call to action is something I made up a term called pace yourself. I'm a runner and not as fit as this guy on the screen, but I came up with PACE to serve as an acronym for kind of a practical way to think entrepreneurial. Number one, prepare yourself. As one of the slides said, luck favors the prepared mind, and learning new techniques, especially the more entrepreneurial ones in the BABOK, whether it's benchmarking or business cases or business model canvas, looking for opportunities. Think entrepreneurially. Seek out mentors and possible sponsors for your venture if you're going to do something. Or if you're going to go off on your own, get some savings, get set up, and prepare yourself for it. Then as you are looking at potential opportunities, analyze them. Do they solve a problem? Are people willing to pay for them? Do I feel passionate about it? That's, I think, very important. And then when you're ready, make your pitch and launch and commit to your opportunity. Be courageous with it. In a reluctant entrepreneur sense, though, right? You can do things part-time, perhaps. Or if you have enough savings, you could just quit your day job. Lastly, evaluate your venture, because no business stays on the same path that they started with. And you need to evaluate where you're going and how things are working, and you may need to make some corrections as you go. But, I've met a lot of BAs, and I think that things we talked about today are things that hopefully you can take away from and apply as the BAs I've talked to are able to do, because I think there are many kinds of overlaps from entrepreneurs to business analysts. And I'm hoping that you can take away some new thoughts and tips for working towards being an entrepreneur or intrapreneur. And now I'm just curious, how many of you think that you might be a potential intrapreneur or entrepreneur? If you are, send out in a note to Adrian. And by the way, what are we waiting for? Let's go preneur something. All right. Well, okay, so now we transition to the Q&A. And by the way, before we get into that, I want to, 2 more slides in your deck have some lists of references here and bibliographies there. So I want to point that out. I'm going to provide a copy to Adrian if you want to post it on your site. And we also have lots of resources on our website too if you'd like to go check us out. So Adrian?
Okay, well, firstly, thank you very much, Rich, for a really interesting take on entrepreneurship and other preneurships as well. And we have quite a few questions coming in.
Excellent.
So we'll take the first question first. In fact, we have 2 similar questions, which I'll kind of wrap up. But one question is around risk-taking. And the question is, well, if entrepreneurs take risks, but often in organizations we're looking to reduce or manage risks, how do those things balance out?
Well, I think, any business venture involves risk. If we think about calculated risk takers, that's why I like the concept of the reluctant entrepreneur, and Michael Masterson in his book talks about being this calculated risk taker, meaning you're well prepared, you've analyzed things, you've got plans to either to mitigate or to respond to risks, balancing those against the rewards, because nothing is ever gained without some kind of risk in business. So doing your homework, I guess, to give a quick answer, and being well thought out is very important, so that we often do it through a business case. I think in organizations, if you don't have a formal business case process, you should develop one, because that is, I've found, the best way to try to balance those things out, and to point out that you've done your homework and show anyone that you are considering the risks, but that you have a plan for how the organization can react to those if they happen, or how to mitigate them and prevent them, maybe, if that's important too.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Rich. And a question from a slightly different angle. Somebody asks, well, what if you're stuck in IT? And I think what they mean by this is that they're wanting to take a holistic view of the business and to engage entrepreneurial, but they're kind of they're stuck as being perceived just as an IT resource. Any recommendations in those circumstances?
Well, first, I would look in your organization to see, are there any other career paths out? So is there a product manager role or a business architecture role? Or there's a new emerging role called a business relationship manager that I'm really excited about, that you'll hear more from Watermark about over the coming months and years as a real viable career path. And see if those roles exist, start looking at what the requirements are for moving into those. And I think if you're being perceived as just quote unquote an IT person, the more you can speak the language of business, the less people will think of you as just an IT person. I had the fortune of starting a business, then going into IT, and so it kind of was inbred in me when I was first starting out in the business world. If you started out in IT, then, of course, let me back up. I had to learn IT then. If you start off in IT, then you need to learn business, I guess, if you will. So getting an MBA is a really broad, long-term proposition, but that's one way. But also then, again, back to what I was saying, look for the different possible jobs that you can move into in your organization and start talking to people in human resources about how you might qualify for those.
Excellent, thank you. Some really good tips there. And a similar question, but from a different angle. Somebody asks, they say that they're a team leader of BAs, and they say, how can they encourage their team to be more intra or intrapreneurial?
Well, okay, that could be a half-hour answer in itself. And you know, I'd love to coach anybody if they'd like some more follow-up, but the quick answer is to look at things as if, first of all, if they're running their own company, okay, what would you do if this was your company? It puts a different hat on your head, so to speak, to view things that way. What would you do differently? And frees people up, and maybe you could do some brainstorming kind of games. Well, if it was your company, what would you do? What problem would you solve first? And how would you solve it? You know, being an entrepreneur is not an inventor. You don't have to teach somebody how to be that wild-eyed scientist, but you could encourage people to learn techniques and go and do some benchmarking. I keep coming back to that because it's such an important one. Or observation, you know, go out and observe customers in the field. I know when I was a junior analyst, that was one of my favorite techniques, and it taught me a lot of value of observation and see what kind of problems the customer base is facing, because really it's all about who's going to pay for the services you provide. And I think a common mistake of young entrepreneurs is that they focused on this product in their mind that they'd like to work on without having any customers in mind that would ever use it. So finding your customers first, finding out what they need second, and then coming up with solutions third is really the way to do it.
Yeah, for sure. Understanding the root need, the root problem, and building from there. So,
oh yeah, you've spoken on that yourself, Adrian.
Indeed, it's a passionate area of mine.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got quite a lot of questions. We'll try and cover as many as we can. So the next one is somebody who asks that they'd like to succeed in being an intrapreneur in their organization, and they actually said that, you know, they're happy to start tomorrow. But
Good.
How will they know when they succeeded? So the question they ask is, how will I know I'm more than just a good BA and I'm actually being an entrepreneur? So I guess they're looking for like almost key performance indicators or some kind of measurement of success.
Well, I think a measurement of success, I know I don't want to sound flippant, but is being asked to do another similar venture. So like when I was at the bank, we got done with one department, and if we botched it, we wouldn't have been asked for the second engagement. So repeat performances are usually a good indicator. And when I first started Watermark Learning, I had no idea where this was going to go. I had no measures of success in mind other than getting the next gig. Seriously, I mean, finding another customer who wanted the same thing I was offering, to me, was tremendous success. So I had kind of a very myopic view of things. Is probably good, because I would have worried too much about failing if I looked at too big of a picture. So I think keeping your sights set, you know, fairly not low, but fairly focused so that you're not, otherwise I think it's too easy to get anxious about way too many things. So repeat engagements is a huge thing. As you know, Adrian, you're an entrepreneur yourself. Um, and maybe another key to success would be if you evaluate your solution that you come up with, because I think of an entrepreneur as producing solutions, and so I really like the new BABOK with its emphasis on solution in it, and the knowledge area of solution evaluation, so that there's a lot of good stuff in that part of the BABOK to look at. So I want to kind of keep my answer short because you said there are a lot of questions. I want to make sure that we have time, so hopefully that helps the person who would ask that.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Okay, so we have a couple of similar questions, and a lot of people are putting comments in saying how much they enjoyed the presentation, Rich. So I think it really resonated. But there are a few questions about how would somebody choose a mentor to help them with entrepreneur or intrapreneurialism?
Well, perhaps you could look for somebody who is perceived as innovative or dynamic or getting things done. How would you find somebody who might be receptive to that? Because I think given the potential fertile ground for business leaders wanting to act entrepreneurially, it's a key question to find out those opportunities. I'm not a great networker, but I'm going to suggest to you to start networking. Ask people. Start with your boss, unless that's kind of dangerous because your boss doesn't want you to leave, right? But ask around about who might be a good mentor to find that out. Maybe somebody like Sarah. If I was at Target, I'd go to Sarah Peterson, somebody who successfully navigated some entrepreneurial waters to produce a product. Maybe if I was at Clorox, I'd seek out these two ladies who successfully started this new product line. So people who are developing new things would probably be your best source for potential mentors to help guide you on how to do it yourself.
Fantastic, fantastic. And so we're running a little short on time, but there's one observation and one final question that will fit in. So an observation that one person has made, they've said that it was definitely an inspiring presentation, and they say that as an older person in my company, I find I can get away with being an entrepreneur easier than younger members of the team. So
cool.
so maybe there's there's something in that perhaps. Final question, and it's a really big question, but the question is, the person says that they're sold on the whole idea, but if you were to recommend one tangible step that someone could take tomorrow to be more intrapreneurial, what would that step be?
Start looking around and saying, if I own this company, what would I do? What would I, so where's a problem? So you can probably come up with a dozen things, hopefully, that you can think of that need fixing, whether it's internally or externally. Look around. If I ran this company, what would I do? That's probably one small tangible thing, but I think it's a definite step to start getting in that entrepreneurial mindset.
Fantastic, and quite a different mindset shift and a different perspective. Yeah. So brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Rich. And we haven't been able to answer quite all of the questions. Rich, if people want to connect with you on social media, do you have a LinkedIn and well, I know you have a LinkedIn and a Twitter account. Are you happy for people to tweet you questions? Of course.
Yes, there's my Twitter handle. I just zipped to the first slide, at Rich Larson _ and then BAPM Training is my LinkedIn. You can also search for Richard Larson on LinkedIn, but and I do have BAPM Training as my shortcut on LinkedIn. So.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, once again, thank you so much, Rich, for taking the time out of the day. I know from the comments that are coming in that people have found this really valuable, and I'm sure that even more people will watch the recording. As a reminder to people on the line, we will have the recording up on the IIBA UK website, normally within about a week. So you can watch it again and recommend it to colleagues to come and watch it as well. Just before we end the session, again, another reminder, if you enjoyed this webinar, then you'll almost certainly enjoy other IIBA UK webinars and indeed real-world events. So this year, so in 2016, we have 24 real-world events planned across the UK. So there are events in Scotland, the north of England, the Midlands, in London, the south, the southwest, and even in Wales as well, of course. So do check out the website, come to an event, it'll be great to see you there. And on top of those 24 real-world events, we're holding 9 virtual webinars. So if there's a topic you want to hear more about, ping me or any other member of the volunteer team an email. We'll see if we can get that in the diary for you. And if you're interested in speaking at an event or a webinar, do get in touch. We're always really interested with people who have a particular topic that they're passionate about or any kind of interesting case study or story to tell. So do keep an eye on the IIBA UK website. Thanks again for dialing in. Thanks again, Rich, and a good evening to everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you much.
Bye.